All right, boys and girls, today's assignment is figuring out the big idea. So we've been talking for the last 2 weeks on figuring out the theme of the story. So we're going to read a story. We've already read it on the play called The Newsies. And I want you to think about what was the theme of the story. So we're going to go through a few slides here, answering questions about the beginning, middle, and end. And then we're going to try to figure out what is the big idea, what is the theme. So if you look at this first slide, it says the theme of a story is the big idea you take away from it. Often when the characters learn an important lesson, you do too. What do the kids in the Newsies learn when they go on strike? This activity will help you figure it out. Okay, so number one, you should have already done, but if you need to click on the link, you can click on the link to go back to the story. Answer the questions on the following slides about the beginning, middle, and end of the play. So I'm going to do that with you on this video. And then we're going to put our lessons together to find the theme or lesson of the play. So I'm just going to click over here on to slide 2. All right, so what happened at the beginning of the play? So the first question says, what happens to the price the Newsies pay for paper during the war? So I'm going to click in this box. So if you remember at the beginning, the price the Newsies have to pay for the paper goes up. It went from 60 cents for 100 papers, or they had to pay 60 cents for 100 papers instead of 50 cents. So that's what I'm going to type here. We're going to say the price at the Newsies, move that out of the way for you. Have to pay for the paper goes up or increases. All right. What happens to the price after the war? So after the war, the price stays the same. So remember, the newspaper owners promised that after the war they would lower the price back down, but they didn't. They kept it the same. So this question says, are the Newsies being treated fairly? And the answer is no, because they were told the price would go down after the war, but the owners did not keep their word. So we're going to say no. The Newsies are not being treated fairly. So notice I'm restating the question. Because the owners promised they would lower the price when the war ended. All right, so just 3 sentences there for this slide. All right, now we're going to go to slide 3. So that was at the beginning of the paper. That's kind of how the whole problem gets set up at the beginning. And this is kind of what causes the Newsies to go on strike. In the middle of the play, it says, what does Sally convince the Newsies to do and why? I mean, Sully, not Sally. And what does Rose explain to Annie about what they're doing? And how are the Newsies being brave? So let's click in this first box. What does Sully convince the Newsies to do and why? So this is the part where Sully convinces them to go on strike. So that's going to be the first question. Sully convinces them to go on strike because if they stick together and don't sell the newspapers, the owners of the newspaper will have to listen to the Newsies demands. All right, so he's trying to say if y'all all stick together and you don't sell any newspapers, then the owners aren't going to make any money. And if they're not making any money, then they'll have to start listening to what you're asking. All right, what does Rose explain to Annie about what they're doing? Rose explains to Annie that sometimes you have to sacrifice up front to get more in the end. So by not selling the newspapers, the Newsies are going to lose money too for a little while they're on strike. But if they all participate in the strike together, they can force the owner to lower the price of the paper. Then they will end up making more money after the strike ends. So what we're going to say is Rose explains that sometimes you have to sacrifice up front to get more in the end. All right. How are the Newsies being brave? Well, they're being brave because they're taking a risk. They're risking that if they go on strike, they're not going to get paid. And maybe nothing will happen. Maybe the owners won't listen to them in the end. So they're willing to give up earning the money for a little while and hopeful if they stick together and the strike will end in their favor. Okay, so we're going to type um, we're going to restate the question. The Newsies are being brave because they are taking a risk by giving up their earnings while they are on strike. So a strike is when you oppose someone else's opinion, like you don't agree with it. Um, and you go and you stick together. You have to have a group of people to do it, and they all share the same opinion of opposing whatever it is they think is unfair. And there is a risk to that of maybe sometimes losing your job, not getting paid, and maybe not getting what you need in the end. All right, so slide 4 is all about what happens at the end of the play. So at the end of the play, it says, what other actions do the Newsies take to make their voices heard? What happens to newspaper sales? What does William Randolph Hearst agree to do? And how does the strike turn out for the Newsies? So let's look at the first question. What other actions do the Newsies take to make their voices heard? So let's click in this box here. And let's think about this. The Newsies hand out flyers asking customers not to buy the World of the Journal or the World or the Journal newspapers and to help them protest, okay? So that's one way, that's an action that they're trying to do to make their voices heard. So we're going to say the Newsies hand out flyers asking people to not buy the newspaper and to support their strike. All right, what does the newspaper sell? What happens to the newspaper sales? And what does William Randolph Hearst agree to? So the newspaper sales drop. So that's what happens. So we're going to type that in here. Oh, come on. Well, make sure there's a text box there. Okay. So if that happens to you, just go and add a text box up there at the top. We're going to say I don't know why it's doing that. Let's see. Do not autofill. All right. The newspaper sales drop. That means people stopped buying them. And the owners start to lose money. Right, so that's exactly what the strike was intended to do. They wanted to kind of put some pressure, something on the owners so they would listen. So William finally he didn't agree to drop the price of the newspapers, but he did agree that any newspaper they didn't sell, he would buy back from them. So William finally agrees to buy back any newspaper that the Newsies can't sell. That way, the Newsies aren't losing any money, and the owner is still getting to sell his newspaper at the higher price that he wanted. All right, how does the strike turn out for the Newsies? So, in the end, the strike turns out well for the Newsies. They get to make more money, and they're not without selling all their newspapers. So, we're going to say the strike turns out well for the Newsies. It turns out well for the Newsies. Oops, let me go back. Let's add on because they won't lose money on the papers they don't sell. All right, last slide is we're putting it all together. So what did the Newsies learn from the actions they took? The Newsies learned that by sticking together, they have power. Okay, so we're going to stick this in here. The Newsies learned, so this is kind of like the theme here, learn that by sticking together, they have power. So y'all may have heard power in numbers or that saying. Put a comma there. That's what that means. So the more people you have that agree with your opinion and can stand up for what they think is right, the more power that you have. I'm going to add some evidence from the text. So I like the part that says, as Annie and Boots say in the epilogue, they say, and the epilogue was at the end of the story, the strike. This is kind of my E part of race, my evidence. So I restated the question. So that's the R. And then I also answered it. That's the A. So RA. And now I'm providing some evidence. The strike gave us power. It showed us that we had rights, even though we were just kids. So I want you to think about, even though we're not filling it out on that graphic organizer for race, we are still completing race, okay? So the Newsies learned, I can even highlight so you can see. We'll make that blue. So that's the R. What did they learn? This is the A. This is the E. The C in race, copy evidence. So I'm going to highlight that in green. And then down here is sort of like the E in race. What lessons do you learn from reading about the Newsies? We're going to kind of explain what the evidence means. The strike gave us power. It showed us that we have rights, even though we were kids. So something, you don't have to word it just like this, but you could say, I learned that kids can be powerful and stand up for important causes by sticking together. So I kind of explained what that meant. So I'm going to highlight this in purple, and that would be my E for race. Okay, so even though I didn't use the graphic organizer, I still completed all the parts of race. And I can even explain a little bit further in this purple if I wanted to. I could say that, sometimes it's hard to stand up for what you believe in. Not always easy. All right, so you kind of get the gist. So you can rewatch this video as much as you want. You can slow it down to kind of help you work through some of the questions. I hope that you've answered the questions before you've watched this video and that you're kind of like checking your answers and fixing your mistakes as you're watching it. All right, good luck, guys, and I will see you tomorrow.